The soup was still simmering when my knees gave out. I don't remember dropping the ladle. I just remember the sudden weight in my chest, sharp, then dull, then everywhere. I grabbed the edge of the counter, but my hands slipped. The floor was colder than I expected. My cheek pressed against the tile. I could still hear the pot bubbling softly on the stove. Chicken and barley. His favorite, not Leah's. She said it tasted like wet socks once, but I made it anyway. My fingers fumbled for the phone. The screen lit up too bright. I tapped the first name in my recents. Dane. It rang twice. "Hey, Mom." "What's up?" His voice was light, distracted. I heard clinking glass and soft laughter in the background. "Something's wrong," I said. My voice was thin, not panicked. Just pulled tight like a fraying thread. A pause. Then, "It's Leah's birthday." We just sat down. I blinked, eyes locked on the ceiling fan above me, spinning lazily like none of this mattered. "Can I call you tomorrow?" he added, as if that would make a difference. "I think I need an ambulance." He sighed. "Then call 911. That's what they're for." And then the line went dead. No follow-up. "No." "Are you alone?" "No, which hospital?" "No, I'm on my way." Just the click. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My body wouldn't let me. I lay there listening to the sound of the soup boiling, the faint pop of something settling in the oven, the hum of my refrigerator door slightly ajar. Eventually, there were sirens. I don't know if I called or if the phone redialed by accident, but someone came. Men in blue lifted me, gently asked my name, clipped a band around my wrist. One of them adjusted the strap beneath my arm and said something kind, but I wasn't listening. I was watching the door, and I knew he wouldn't walk through it. The bowl was still on the floor when I opened my eyes in the hospital. Not literally, of course. It had shattered back home soup spilling across the tile like it had somewhere better to be. But I could still see it. The jagged pieces, the broth seeping under the cabinets, the stain it would leave if no one cleaned it up. And no one would. The nurse adjusted my IV line. She was kind but tired. She smiled without meeting my eyes and asked the standard questions: pain level, allergies, next of kin. I answered on autopilot, feeling more like a form than a person. She paused before leaving and glanced toward the door. "Is someone coming to sit with you?" I shook my head. No flowers. No knock. No footsteps in the hallway that slowed near my room. Just the steady rhythm of machines and the quiet hush of rubber soles on linoleum. I stared at the ceiling until it blurred, then shifted my gaze to the drip bag overhead. It swung slightly each time I moved, like it was the only thing paying attention. In my head, I made a list. I remembered Dane's first broken bone, 8 years old, jumping off the shed. I slept in the hospital chair for 2 nights, holding his hand while cartoons played on mute. I remembered the night he called crying because Leah was threatening to leave. I stayed on the phone whispering reassurances while reheating soup he never picked up. When their furnace broke last winter, I covered the bill. When their sitter canceled, I watched their daughter with 10 minutes notice. I never said no. Now he had. He had said no so easily, like it had been rehearsed. Call 911. That's what they're for. Not, "I'll be right there." Not, "Hang on." Not, "You're not alone." I turned my head to the window, but the blinds were shut. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like something had been scooped out. I closed my eyes and pictured the drawer at home, the one where I kept the legal folder Dane had never asked about. The soup had dried into the grout. I stood over it with a sponge, not because I wanted to, but because no one else would. The stain didn't lift easily. It clung the way old habits do. The house was silent again, as if nothing had happened. No calls, no texts, no footsteps, just the faint ticking of the kitchen clock and the hum of the fridge. I threw the sponge in the sink and wiped my hands on the same towel Dane used to drag across the floor when he was little, pretending it was a cape. It had holes now. I kept it anyway. I walked to the hallway and opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet by the stairs. Inside was a manila folder he never once asked about. Inside, everything I had built quietly, my will, written 5 years ago after the gallbladder surgery. The checking account with his name still listed as co-owner. A trust fund I had planned to activate when he turned 40. A power of attorney form I had printed but never signed. I sat down at the dining table with the folder and a pen. My hand moved slowly, not because of the pain, but because I wanted to feel each word. Call Ethan Rains. Remove Dane's name. Cancel the trust transfer. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. It felt like rinsing a glass that had been left out too long, just work that needed to be done. I added another line underneath. Stop monthly transfer to joint card. He probably hadn't even noticed that money came from me. It just showed up like the groceries I used to stock his fridge with, like the blankets I folded after watching his daughter, like the soup that spilled when I collapsed. I closed the folder, slid it back into the drawer. Then I walked down the hall to the guest room, the one with the extra pillows, the nightlight still plugged in, and the half-full bottle of baby shampoo they hadn't taken with them. The door stuck a little the way it always did when the weather shifted. I pushed it open with my hip and stepped inside, already knowing what I'd find. The room still smelled like baby lotion and detergent, the scent lingering, even though it had been months since they stayed the night. I used to keep it made up just in case. Clean sheets, a soft nightlight, a box of spare diapers in the closet, even after she was long out of them. I told myself it was practical, but it was hope disguised as planning. There were still toys on the floor. A faded bunny with one ear half chewed, a puzzle missing 2 pieces. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked them up one by one, placing them in a cardboard box I'd dragged from the garage. They never came back for these. I opened the drawer on the small dresser. A hairbrush, a sippy cup, a tiny sock balled in the corner. I ran my hand along the inside of the drawer, then wiped it clean with an old rag, folding the fabric tightly as if it made a difference. When I finished, I stood in the doorway and looked at the room as if I were checking out of a hotel. Everything neat, anonymous. No signs of love left lying around. I walked outside, lifted the flower pot on the porch, and pulled out the spare key Dane always used without asking. I used to tell myself it was convenient, that he needed to feel welcome, unannounced. I wiped the dirt from the metal and slid it into the same envelope as the banknote I'd canceled that morning. Back inside, I stood at the threshold again, then reached up and unplugged the nightlight. The room dimmed, but it didn't feel sad. It felt clean, empty in a way that let me breathe. I carried the box to the hall closet, set it high on a shelf, and went to boil water for tea. It took him 2 days, long enough for the bruises on my arm from the IV to fade, long enough for me to stop waiting for footsteps on the porch. When the doorbell finally rang, I already knew who it was. Through the glass, I saw him holding a bouquet white lilies, the ones he thought were my favorite. He'd bought them once for a Mother's Day years ago, and must have assumed that meant forever. I opened the door halfway. "Mom," he said, smiling too brightly. "You look good." "Better." "I'm fine." He exhaled as though relieved to get that out of the way. "You should have told me it was serious." I did. The words hung there, quiet but sharp. His smile faltered. "You know how it is. Leah's family was already there, and everyone expected you don't have to explain," I said. "You made your choice." He shifted the bouquet from one hand to the other, searching for the right tone. "Don't make this a bigger deal than it is. You've always been a little dramatic when it comes to these things." That word landed differently now. I used to laugh it off, used to tell myself he didn't mean it that way. But standing there, the space between us felt like something permanent. Maybe I said, "But I'm done performing." He blinked, not understanding, maybe not wanting to. So what now? You're just shutting me out. No, I said, easing the door closer to its frame. I'm just done leaving it open. His mouth opened like he might argue, but I was already turning the lock. The sound clicked between us, small but absolute. The lilies brushed against the door as he lowered his hand. I didn't pick them up. Inside the kettle was still warm from earlier. I poured the water, steeped the tea, and sat at the table. Through the window, I watched the flowers wilt in the late afternoon sun. When the mail came an hour later, there was an envelope on top of the stack printed with Leah's name. The envelope was thick but flat. No return address, just her name printed in the top left corner. I knew the tone before I opened it. Leah never called unless it was to confirm a time. She never texted unless she needed something. She wrote when she wanted control. Inside was a full page printed, probably drafted twice. We're disappointed it began. Not, how are you feeling? Not, we're sorry we didn't come. Just disappointment directed at me. This isn't how families treat each other. I read the whole thing. Every sentence was dressed in civility, but the subtext was clear. I had embarrassed them. I had made things uncomfortable. I had shifted their neat version of the story. There was no mention of the hospital, no acknowledgement of the night I called, just an accounting of how my silence had inconvenienced their narrative. I folded the letter back along its original crease, slid it into the shredder beside the desk, watched the blades catch and pull it through. Then I turned to the laptop, logged into the shared savings account Dane had access to since college. He hadn't touched it in months, but the fact that he still could made something twist inside me. I opened the settings, removed his name, disabled the secondary card. Then I moved on to the autopay transfers $100 each month for household emergencies that always seemed to land in their court. A utilities account I hadn't lived at for years but still had my name on. The cushion payment for their daughter's preschool, something I quietly covered when they were between paychecks. Each one I closed, not out of anger, just necessity. By the time I shut the laptop, the air in the room felt cleaner, not lighter, but clearer, like I could finally see where the edges were. The voicemails started that evening. First Dane, then Leah, then Dane again. I miss you, Mom. This is tearing us apart. We didn't mean for things to go this way. I listened to each one in silence. Not a single apology. Not one I'm sorry I didn't come. They spoke in circles about feelings, misunderstandings, the need to move forward, but never the moment that mattered. Never the call they ignored. Never the floor I lay on. By the fifth message, I stopped listening to the end. The next morning, I called a locksmith. He was a quiet man with a patient rhythm, didn't ask questions when I said I needed every lock changed. He slid the old ones into a bag and handed them to me like evidence. I dropped them in the trash. Later that afternoon, I called the hospital. I need to update my emergency contact, I told the nurse at the front desk. Of course, she said. Who should we add me? She paused, then continued typing. Noted. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, that I could be my own person in a system that always asked, who else should we call for you? There had always been someone else, even if that someone never showed up. I walked the house afterward, noticing every crack in the walls, every corner where the paint had peeled. I made a list, but not of repairs, of boundaries. No more copies of keys. No unannounced visits. No more quiet forgiveness disguised as love. The phone buzzed again. I didn't answer. The sound felt like someone knocking on a door that no longer existed. I moved the toy box to the garage and came back with an armful of things that had always belonged to me, but somehow never had a place. The guest room didn't feel like a guest room anymore. The bed was gone, donated the day before. I had rolled up the rug, wiped down the baseboards, opened the window. It smelled different now. Not like diapers or detergent or days spent waiting. Just air and space. I unpacked a stack of books I had been saving for someday. A quiet someday that always got interrupted by a phone call, a favor, a knock on the door. I lined them along the windowsill spine out so I could see the titles when I sat. The chair arrived that afternoon, a soft one, with curved arms and a high back. I assembled it slowly, piece by piece, careful not to rush. When it was done, I ran my hand over the cushion and sat down without hesitation. It felt like claiming something. On the desk, I placed a small notebook, a pen I liked, and a mug I'd bought years ago on a whim, one no one else in the house had ever used. I hung a scarf across the back of the chair. I'd knitted it the winter Dane lost his job. I was going to give it to him, but Leah said it looked too handmade. I kept it in the linen closet instead. Now it hung like a soft reminder. Not everything I make has to be for someone else. The drawer on the far side of the room still held a few photographs. Dane at 4, sticky with frosting. Dane at 16, arms crossed at graduation. I didn't throw them out. I just slid them deeper into the drawer and closed it gently. This room wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing. I made a cup of tea and watched the light move across the floor, slow and clean. The envelope was small, cream-colored, tucked between the grocery flyer and the electric bill. No return address. No handwriting, I recognized. I almost tossed it aside, but something about its weight made me pause. Inside was a card. Simple. No image, no design, just words typed carefully on thick paper. I remember you from the hospital. Years ago. You helped my mother when I couldn't. You brought her a blanket, held her hand stayed when no one else did. You told me I wasn't alone. I never forgot that. You mattered to a stranger. I thought you should know. That was all. No name, no signature. I read it twice slowly. Then again. My hands didn't shake, but my chest pulled tight in a way that had nothing to do with pain. I had no memory of the moment they described. Not exactly. There were too many nights, too many rooms. But I believed it. It sounded like something I would have done. Something I did often. Quietly. Without expecting anything in return. I held the card for a long time before sliding it into the drawer next to my writing desk. Not hidden, but not displayed either. Just there where I could find it if I needed a reminder. For years I had waited for gratitude from the wrong people. Waited for calls, for thank yous, for someone to see what I gave and say it mattered. But this note from a stranger felt more real than any bouquet or voicemail ever had. I didn't need my son to prove I existed. I didn't need Leah to soften her tone. I didn't need to be forgiven for choosing myself. I already had proof. I had it in my hands. The light came in soft across the kitchen tile, touching the edges of the counter, the rim of the kettle, the chair I always used. I moved slowly that morning, not because I was tired, but because I didn't have to rush. There was no list. No expectation. No one coming by. No voicemail blinked on the machine. No knock at the door. Just the steady creak of the floor under my bare feet and the scent of warm bread from the toaster. I set the table for one. Not out of habit, but intention. A single plate. A cloth napkin. A clean mug. I used to wait through mornings like this, listening for footsteps, hoping the phone would ring. I would have said I was being patient. That I understood. That they were busy. Now I see it for what it was. Hunger mistaken for loyalty. I sat down and ate quietly. Eggs, toast, a sliced orange. The kind of meal no one else ever asked for, no one else would interrupt. And I didn't feel empty. I felt steady. Outside, the wind lifted the edges of the neighbor's flag. The trees bent slightly in greeting, and the world went on without apologies, without explanations. I had spent so long trying to earn love, I had already given freely. Now I gave it back to myself. The calendar on the fridge still had old appointments scribbled in blue pen. Pick up Nora Pay Insurance, drop off Leah's dry cleaning. I tore the page away and tossed it in the bin. October would begin clean. The kettle hissed softly behind me. I poured a second cup of tea, even though I didn't need it. I liked the sound. I liked the space it filled. Later, I'd walk to the bookstore, maybe bring home something with a spine that creaked when opened. Maybe I'd write a little, just a paragraph or two. But for now, I just sat in the light. Not waiting, not explaining, just here. And for the first time in years, it was enough.